Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you all and greetings for the World Environment Day. My special welcome goes to our respected Director General, Sir, and Vice Chancellor, Gujarat Forensic Sciences University, Dr. J.M. Vyas, Sir, for guiding under his able hands in organizing the webinar series. I also welcome Director, Institute of Behavioral Science, our very own and Reverend Brigadier Dr. K.K. Tripathi, Sir, for conceiving the idea of hosting the imperative webinar on qualitative research methods and analysis, Series 1, Fundamental Aspects, scheduled for today, and Series 2, Methods and Procedure, which will be hosted tomorrow. I'm also thankful to our Registrar, Sir, Dr. C.D. Jadeja, for giving the administrative help. I also extend my greetings and thanks to the Technical Committee Head, Dr. Digvijay Singh Rathore, and his team, which includes Mr. Ramya Shah and Mr. Rehan Patel. Now I would request our Director, Sir, Brigadier Dr. K.K. Tripathi, to share his opening remarks on this auspicious occasion of hosting the Qualitative Research Method Analysis webinar. Over to Dr. K.K. Tripathi, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Prashanto. A very good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I welcome you all to this fascinating series of webinars on qualitative research methods. I am given to understand by Dr. Prashanto and Mr. Vishal that around 1,700 participants have registered for this series of webinars. And out of these, around 17, they are from places out of the country. That itself shows the amount of interest the topic has generated in the audience. Nevertheless, in case I have to make a case for this webinar, I would start from a quote from no less than Einstein, and what it says is like this: not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. There cannot be any denial that Albert Einstein was probably one of the most genius persons who ever walked upon this earth. And mostly he has spoken in the context of science, especially physics. But some of his quotes, they are quite philosophical. And this is no exception to that. Of course, not everything in our life can be counted and submitted to quantitative analysis. Say, for example, in case you want to assess, measure, analyze, and understand the preferences for the end of life care for somebody who is terminally ill, you cannot apply a qualitative research method. You have to understand it. Similarly, in the context of forensic psychology, in case you wish to appreciate what are the problems which are bugging the narco analysis, why the conviction rate is very low in cases which are with ACB, that is Anti-Corruption Bureau, you have to resort to a qualitative research methodology and not the quantitative one. So therefore, all these arguments and the quote of Einstein, this itself justifies this effort, and indirectly it gives a shut-up call to the fanatics of quantitative methods like me, who always believed that they are the only methods available to a researcher in pursuance of his studies. I am given to understand, and we have seen it, that qualitative research methods, they are included in the syllabi of almost all the universities in the master's programs in psychology. But what surprises me is that the expertise in this area is limited to only. With this perception in mind, we made an attempt, and I am happy that my team has identified certain eminent personalities who have been using qualitative methods day in and day out. The speakers of the day, Dr. Ishita Upadhyay and her disciple, Dr. Bakshi, they are from Delhi University and they are quite conversant with qualitative research. And in case I'm honest, I have to be honest here, I spoke to one of her disciples here. She is my student. She is doing MPhil in clinical psychology. And when I asked her some questions, immediately I came to know that she has been mentored by a very capable person. And then I spotted her and then I requested her. And I'm thankful that both of them, they have acceded to my request and spared this time to be with us and educate us, I will say, on qualitative research. During my interaction with them, I also appreciated that probably a week-long seminar, when the team comes here and it gives a hands-on exposure experience to the participants, would have been more appropriate. But obviously, we cannot do that because of the corona crisis. And we have taken a decision in consultation with the university authorities that once this crisis is over, this will be a regular affair and we'll be holding workshops in a physical form, obviously, which will impart a hands-on experience to the participants. And then I'll be welcoming you here, doing some qualitative analysis in reality. Since the organizers have not slated me to speak at the end of the webinar, obviously because of the shortage of time, so now itself I take this opportunity to again profusely thank the two speakers. We are grateful to both of you, madam, and we are really honored because of your involvement, because of your presence here. And with these words, I would like to conclude my conversation. Happy learnings. God bless you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. K.K. Tripathi, sir, our very special guest for today. Well, I am Dr. Prashanto Kumar Saha, Assistant Professor, Institute of Behavioral Science, Gujarat Forensic Sciences University. I will be moderating the session today, and I'm being assisted by another dynamic person, Mr. Vishal Kumar, who is also a colleague and Assistant Professor in the same institute. Well, with the design and the notion which our director, sir, has opened to the August gathering, a larger audience on YouTube, we have planned the 2 days webinar series on qualitative research methods and analysis in order to answer some queries and questions which came across while conceiving this idea of hosting it. What can be learned from qualitative research and how students and researchers can benefit from this research domain. So looking into this, ladies and gentlemen, today's August gathering is being channelized by two eminent researchers and academicians in the field of qualitative research. I am elated to introduce our first speaker of the day, Dr. Ishita Bhardwaj, who is currently working as a senior faculty, Department of Psychology, North Campus, University of Delhi. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce her, who is going to talk to us about the fundamental aspects of qualitative research methodology. This is a subject wherein we should all be deeply interested because it's by learning and involving ourselves that our brain helps us to remember and recall. And this has been aptly stated by Benjamin Franklin. I quote, "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I will learn." So Dr. Ishita Upadhyay, and now she is a Bhardwaj, completed her PhD from University of Allahabad in 2010 after attaining her master's degree from Banaras Hindu University in 2003 with a gold medal. She also worked as a research associate in a major project on emotion and cognition under Professor Rukmini B. Nair and Professor Purnima Singh from IIT Delhi way back in 2010. She has also contributed to academia by working as an assistant professor in Ambedkar University for 2 years before she joined the Delhi University. Her research interest has been in the areas of qualitative inquiry, culture and psyche, existentialism and phenomenology, religion and spirituality, gender discourses, self in Indian thought, emotion and cognition. Dr. Ishita has published many journal articles in reputed national and international journals. She is also associated with professional bodies like NAUP, ISCP, etc. Dr. Ishita has also completed a couple of major research projects funded by various institutions. With this short description of Dr. Ishita Bhardwaj, now I would request Dr. Ishita to take over the online platform and share her views on fundamentals of conducting qualitative research. Over to you, ma'am. Please.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Prashanto. And before I begin, I would like to extend my greetings to the Gujarat Forensic Science University for organizing this meaningful forum for qualitative understanding. And sir, I'm really grateful to you, Brigadier Tripathi ji, for considering qualitative and giving qualitative such a significant importance. No doubt that in the current scenario, qualitative research undoubtedly holds a merit and has a lot to contribute in our understanding of scientific knowledge and how psychology works. I'm also thankful to the technical team, Digvijayji, Ramya, Vishal, everybody, for organizing this webinar. This is for the first time when we say about qualitative, some of us are venturing onto a platform like this because so far we were more connected personally, we were more connected physically, and we were trying to understand the concepts not just by speaking, but also trying to feel how the audience, how the listeners take it. So indeed, it's quite an experience because talking about fundamentals in qualitative research in a forum where it's both a dialogue and a monologue. So I hope that we make some sense and the listeners and the audience, along with me, are able to grasp the essence of qualitative research. But before we begin, the topic for today's, let's not call it a lecture, but today's sharing in the first half is around fundamentals in qualitative research. A very basic topic, a very basic chapter, which all the qualitative textbooks, they have it religiously as the first chapter of their text. And if we go by it, what we get to see is the historical basis. What we get to see is why qualitative is needed. What we get to see is the importance of qualitative research. And just after that starts the methods, different methods. So every chapter entails one method, narrative, grounded theory, etc. So years back when I started with my master's, and even before master's, probably in graduation, I always felt that the books in psychology, they were taken by me with a promise that they're going to help me. They are going to give me a little more understanding about myself and the world around me. But somewhere, the concepts, the theories, they, after a point, were silent. After a point, there wasn't much they had to offer me. And in the initial years, there was a lot of self-doubt that probably something is wrong with me because everybody, they say that psychology is such a fantastic subject. It has so much to contribute. It has great insights. And whenever we mention that we are students of psychology, there was some kind of awe around our presence that, oh, probably they know the answer and they can understand us. But deep within, there was always this feeling that, no, I'm not able to understand because there are many, many parts in me which are scattered, which are fragmented, which are in split. And there is a lot of dissonance, there is a lot of conflict unexplained in the given theories because theories in textbooks, they appear very neat, very clean. And it seems that at a given point of time, either I'm this or I'm that. I cannot be both. And then with this discord, with this uh, a mild sense of disenchantment, that what brought me to qualitative. And the first experience was, wow, this is something which I want to do. But once again, how to do qualitative? That was something where we were left helpless. No one to tell us how to do qualitative. And whenever we went for training, whenever we went for learning about qualitative, most of the time what we were taught is the method. This is the method, this is the method. But what about the questions? What about the understanding? What about the researcher? How does the researcher sees it? So it took us and it took me some couple of years to ingrain in a manner for realizing that fundamentals of qualitative is not just about the history, it is also about the spirit of qualitative research. Having taught this paper, this subject for a couple of years now, with every batch comes a challenge and a question. Looking at their faces, is it possible for all of us to be qualitative researchers, ma'am? Why are we finding it so difficult? Why isn't it little simpler to decode, understand data, understand reality? Because the very essence, the epistemological, the ontological, the paradigms, these issues they are not just they retain till the boundary of psychology. They expand beyond the boundary of psychology, and they almost take you into the psychic construction, in the very essence of human dynamicity. And that is the quest, that is the urge, the spirit with which some of us have delved in this area. So, with this background, I would request you all to, for coming couple of minutes, be oriented that be sure I'm not going to talk about history. I am not going to talk about anything that is there in the textbooks, because great authors and great researchers have already documented the classic realizations in this area. What I'm going to talk about, what I'm going to share with you, is how to understand the fundamentals of qualitative research. So, more than the basics, the spirit of qualitative research. So, that is going to be the focus of my talk. It's indeed an interesting time. I'm not calling it a scary time, because in amidst the COVID, the pandemic, each one of us, collectively, individually, culturally, institutionally, we are undergoing a paradigm shift, a tremendous paradigm shift. Being a woman, being a working person, and also managing home and workspace, the issue of meaning, the issue of crisis, the issue of what to look forward to is something that most of us are coming very closely to question. The idea of human communication, once again, we can see is moving towards a shift. What and how to communicate. So, despite the technological advancement, human communication is going through a deep crisis. The technological crisis was already stated, but now it's also a physical communication crisis. And if we believe that man is a social being, then what is the how to deal with the despair of human need to communicate, what to do with it? So these are some of the questions which I was reflecting and wondering that this fundamentals of qualitative research, it brings us very close to one basic question, which as a student and even as a teacher, it keeps coming back to my mind again and again. And I keep asking this question: what is qualitative in qualitative research? That's one question which intrigues me. It's very close to the spirit of inquiry. What is qualitative in qualitative research? How do we understand the qualitative in qualitative research? That's one question which my talk would entail. The other question I wish to take on is, how do we understand data? Because with the orientation of education, with the orientation of science, we are made to believe that data is outside. Data is that which is objective. Data is that which is visible. Data is that which can be understood by everybody in more or less the similar manner. So anything other than this, does it qualify to be a data? If so, then what is the mechanism of understanding such a data? So that is going to be another point of my reflections and sharings with you. Brigadier Sir mentioned something very interesting. In fact, I too have been reading on Einstein's work and how he talks about intuitive mind and rational mind. And he says the importance of intuitive mind after a point is worthy enough. It is so much needed even for a proper functional rational mind. And what is this intuitive mind? So rightly Sir said that even when we are working with evidences, we are working with truth, we are working with eyewitness testimony, the individual is so important, and deconstructing, decoding the mechanism within the mind, within the behavior, the intent of the individual, this is so much of need to understand this so as to understand what is happening. So taking the loop from there, usually we have this impression when we talk about qualitative is that qualitative is about language and qualitative is not about number. And many researchers, they continue believing this, that if you are good with language, then you can do qualitative. And if you are interested in numbers, you must go for quantitative. So this orientation itself, I feel, this is my take, it is very much at fault, because for any social science researcher, and especially in psychology, irrespective whether you are qualitative or quantitative, you do require a very unique skill to connect with human intent, to connect with human mind, to understand the explicit and the implicit. And these are the very essence that is taken care in the core training of becoming a qualitative researcher. And it is always the becoming which sustains in qualitative research. It's still quite a doubt that how many of us can claim to say that, well, I have learned what is qualitative research. Now, let me give you an example. And this example is something we all have grown up with. We believe this, we practice it, but there is a difference in our experience of it. And that example is around truth and experience. So if I were to ask you this question in a monologue manner, where does the sun rises? And I think all of us, even the questioner, the one who's raising this, and the one who's listening it, would say it rises in the east. And there are poetries, there are phrases, there are motivational talks, motivational quotes And the entire belief system that we must wake up early before the sun rises, why waking up early before the sun rises is important, etc., etc. And despite this belief, what we believe is true, it is another slice of truth which we all have been taught and told scientifically. And I need not get into the rotation and revolution of Earth and how this entire system operates. But do we ever refer to that truth which we are taught, we are told, as something to be believed? So, can you see that we have one pattern of belief, just what we believe, and it coexists absolutely without any dissonance to a slice of truth. And we are perfectly all right with this dissonance. None of us undergo any kind of split. None of us undergo any kind of discord, any kind of disorientation that why we're being told something which doesn't happen. Why so? So, and there are several such examples we can think in our daily lives, what we believe and what we know. We were being taught and trained to think that once you know, your belief will change. But now we also come to realize that how much of knowing is important for us to change our behavior. We know smoking cigarette is injurious to health. We all know that. But does it stop us from getting into that behavior? So somewhere, the quality of knowing is something that remains unquestioned, and it is something to which we researchers doing work with human behavior, we become absolutely blind because no one helped us to realize that, well, knowing is also of different shades. There are shades and grades of knowing, and there are certain kinds of knowing that may have absolute discord to what can be considered true, if there is a truth. However, that knowing is equally important as that slice of truth. And whenever we try to take away any of these axes, the person, his support system, his understanding, his sense of being, it kind of collapses. So, to set the footing around this thought, it is so important first to realize that everything that we know, everything that we believe, everything that we practice need not be the only truth. We may speak in a manner to say that what I know is the truth because we want to believe that what we know is the truth. We want to believe that I am standing with the truth because we are being told once again there is only one truth. And none of us want to miss that opportunity of not having that piece of truth, having which others would consider us to be great. But so as a researcher, though I'm interested in discovering the truth of the person, I am also interested in understanding the experience around that truth, the experience of that person as well. So this essence, it holds the space and the cue for understanding the qualitative of qualitative research, where we are moving deeper from a standalone truth to the experience around that truth, whatever truth we have. And in a while, we'll also try to discover, is there a possibility of having multiple truths? Or once again, is it another dictum being told that there are multiple truths? So, in one way, in qualitative research has to do with human experience. And why human experience? Because anything impinging on human behavior cannot be discounted without having the impact of what the person is, what his realizations are. It cannot be understood without taking into account how his being, his experiences, his presence, his context, his relational trajectory, it impacts the way he is. It impacts and it makes him what he is, and it also makes him what he could not. Therefore, to really make sense of behavior as psychology claims, we perhaps cannot leave this axis outside because it's a very potential aspect of human behavior. Now comes another important aspect, and this aspect is extremely interesting, extremely challenging. If we go by the standard definition of research, standard definition of inquiry, we have seen that for a very long time, the researcher was the one holding the power. The researcher was the one talking about that what is to be known, how it is to be known, when it is to be known, and then qualifying the known in a manner which makes sense to the world of science, the body of knowledge, and that becomes a way of understanding the reality outside. So there is the researcher, there is the phenomena about which we are trying to study, and the researcher extracting and understanding and trying to say that, well, this is what is about the phenomena. But is it foolproof? Because if we were to believe the infinity of human existence, if we were to believe that much prior to an experience being taken into account, there are catalytic, there are trajectory impacts to leading to that experience, how can we exclude that experience in a manner and make it unique? This is what I'm trying to study, and this is where my answers to my questions are going to stay and rest. Because the researcher, once again, is a very important aspect in the frame of research. Why the researcher is an important aspect? Because the researcher, in his scientific aspiration, brings a disguised self where his assumptions, his or her biases, his or her intents, his or her way of looking at the phenomena, at the context, at the situation, whatever aspect the subject of inquiry, in a certain manner. And never before the researcher was ever made to question his own belief system. Why? Because the researcher has to be neutral. The researcher has to be still. The researcher has to be objective because reality is outside and data is outside. But how do we take into account and how do we understand this biases, this reserve of his or her making, which undoubtedly impacts the research inquiry, but has not been questioned, has not been examined, has not been looked into. So it often leads to one kind of dilemma: how important it is for us to be trained first as a qualitative researchers and then get into qualitative research, or is there a mechanism, is there a way that while doing such researches in this manner, there is a possibility of getting trained as well. I adhere to the latter because I believe that um, in the making of a qualitative researcher, every experience, it accounts to an insight, and it takes you further to realize how much is left unknown. So when we come to this design in qualitative, it can be seen in a manner where there is the context, there is the subject, there is the researcher, and there is a tool, the inquiry. And there is the interplay of the context, the subject, the researcher, and the tool, which shapes, forms, and leads to qualitative inquiry, the qualitative spirit. Because context, once again, it is mapped by the researcher's understanding. How much are you able to expand? How much are you able to take the trivialities, the nitty-gritties into account when you are trying to understand a certain behavior? Let me give you an example of women empowerment, a very interesting topic, and has been a very dominant topic for last 2 decades. Everywhere we see these campaigns of women empowerment. Women need to be empowered. And some of us wish to believe that we are empowered. We are empowered. Now, most of the research, if you look in this dimension, they took a very convenient sample. And the sample was taking urban women, working women, and non-working women, assuming that non-working women are unempowered and working women are empowered. And what do we do with that? We create a dichotomy of sample. We have working women, and our questions to them are also with that assumption that they are empowered. So we ask them that, how do you feel that you're working? How do you feel in a man's world being at par with him or with your situation? How do you feel to be a decision maker, etc., etc.? This is the kind of question we ask them. And the kind of questions we ask to the other group, assuming that they are unempowered, we ask them questions loaded with this assumption. How do you feel not being centric in decision making? How do you feel that despite your education, you are not working? How do you feel when you look at others, etc., etc.? And then we conclude that, well, women in this kind, they are extremely empowered, and of this kind, they have an experience of unempowerment. But there is a very strong bias working here. And it's not just an individual bias, it's a cultural bias. It's a bias which has been packaged in a manner for all of us to believe that just by sheer working and going out in the social spaces and being visible and working the way the model of work has been presented to us, we can claim our empowerment. And what happens is that it has a retaliatory impact on our psyche. Because despite being a working woman, despite being in agency in some capacity, being agentic in some capacity, there are several domains of one's experience where I still feel unempowered. But the larger discourse, the dominant discourse around a working woman is such that there is no ear to understand this experience of being unempowered. There is no one to realize this, and to whom should such individuals go and speak that this is my experience, this is how I feel. So these biases are not just research driven, they are in the very making of the researcher, and they are very integral core part. It's simply quite difficult to take this aspect out from them and make them see it in an objective manner. Now, the design was perfect, the tool was perfect, the researcher tried neutralizing and counterbalancing various different variables. But what about the very assumption on the topic? What about the very assumption on the nature of sample? How these samples were being designed? How did I select one sample, and why did I select a particular sample in comparison to another sample? And these comparative studies, for a very long time, they seem to work from a deficit model. So, working, non-working, work-life balance issues in from a gender perspective. And whenever we are talking about work-life balance from a gender perspective, we immediately think of a particular gender in mind, which is, of course, the women. And it makes me think that why only women when we are talking about work-life balance? Because men, like women, are also trying to balance their work and personal lives. So, what kind of grant are we giving them? What kind of discount are we giving them in believing that, well, their balance is not so much stressful because there lies one another major assumption and bias, which we keep validating through our research. And probably in doing such kind of work, we are never able to hit the right spot where the issue is. So, the interplay between context, subject, inquiry, and researcher. This interplay, the kind of dynamics that takes place between these four positions and how they exchange positions. So, how the researcher also has a subject within, and how the subject and the researcher at a given point of time, they are collaborators, they are together, they are researchers. They also share their subjective elements, but then after a point they have separate positions. So the entire research process is a very, very interesting series of positionality and series of positional changes if documented, and if documented in a clearer manner, there holds the understanding of the phenomena. And then, unlike the other training models where the method is relatively simpler, they say, because usually we are taught to believe that numbers and equations, if you have an equation, you put that and you get your data. But how do you make sense of that data? What does that data say? So if you go by the quantitative work in psychology as well, most of us feel little helpless when we see data because the data is never questioned. The data, the more the equation, the more there are these mathematical approaches, the more there are numbers, the more we tend to believe that, well, these numbers are important and therefore let's not question the numbers. In this context, a very recent example is how at an international level around the pandemic, the data taken on drug trials is being questioned because these data pool, which was gathered from certain sections, the nature of their gathering, the context in which they were gathered, what was the intent, and when these papers in haste and because there's an emergency and we need to have some kind of understanding of the trajectory of what is happening around this pandemic, how the peer review, looked into the manuscript without looking into the nature of data gathering, the context of data gathering. And these questions precisely become important because they are the significant point of guide when we are working in qualitative research. They are extremely important aspects to be reflected on when we are doing a qualitative research. So, as I said, that unlike the other approach or other ways of doing research where the method is outside, one of the fundamentals in qualitative research, to my understanding, is that the nature of inquiry is very much guided the way the researcher understands, the kind of position the researcher takes, the kind of subjective baggage the researcher has, carries, is bringing in consciously, but much of it is unconscious, not known, because method gets shaped, method gets informed, and method finds a body through the conduct of the researcher, how the researcher conducts it. You may have come across this experience several times on and off, some of you, or I think most of you. The word narrative, which is extremely fashionable, extremely interesting, and most of us, we wish to believe that, well, we did not conduct interview, we did narratives. And narratives is something which holds more depth as compared to interviews. But when you get into the excerpts, when you get into the text, the nature of conduct, I often found that the researcher was assuming to have conduct narratives, but the researcher was conducting a non-narrative interview. It was more an interview, probably a structured interview, a semi-structured interview. But because the researcher had taken an anchor into narratives and wanted to believe that I'm conducting narrative, this was the assumption around which the data was looked into. So whether it is grounded theory, whether it is narrative, whether it is interview, whether it is phenomenology, any of the method in qualitative research, they have one common element. And if one thing is being learned properly in qualitative research, my hunch is you can do most of the methods, any of the methods. And that is how to understand data. So most of these test books, they do tell us different methods, but they are extremely silent in helping us understand where to look for the data. Is the data outside? Is the data what the subject says? Is the data what the subject is not saying? Is the data how I understand? Or is the data what I fail to understand? How do I understand data? And this becomes the another point of my reflection for a couple of minutes now. How do I understand data? To figure this out, the aspect of data, how do we decode data? Prior to qualitative training, prior to our exposure in qualitative research, the givens were considered to be the aspect of data, the slice of data. Whatever is given to me, whatever is being told that this is how a data is. But the moment we come into qualitative, or let's not even use the word qualitative for some time, any simple research. So when I ask this question, how are you feeling? And you respond in a manner, you're feeling good, you're feeling bad, you're feeling usual. From where my question emerged, what was it that I really wanted to understand when I raised this question? How are you feeling? And this is the first thing we are taught when we are being trained as researchers in psychology, that you need to build some amount of rapport. You need to have some kind of familiarity. पर ये रैपो बिल्डिंग हम में से कोई नहीं आपस में पूछता है या कोई नहीं सिखाता कि रैपो बिल्डिंग कैसे हो गई. हम अपने सारे रिपोर्ट में we write this that for couple of minutes the first thing we did was building rapport. What do we do when we are building rapport? So we have these few customary questions. How are you feeling now? Are you okay? How was the day? Etc. etc. And then we brief the participant about the nature, reason for the meeting, and then we start with our research process. Is that enough? Is that enough for any rapport building, irrespective whether I know the participant or I don't know the participant? If the participant has been someone familiar to me, then isn't this rapport building a kind of facade? Because has it been sufficient for me to orient the participant? The purpose of rapport building is basically to create a kind of orientation and enable the participant and also the researcher to get into another mode, because there would be exploration, there would be some kind of journey into another experience, another nature of experience. So it's kind of preparation, preparedness, what we say in Gestaltist language. We are preparing ourselves to understand, have more better tuning towards that experience, which is the point and the objective of our inquiry. If that is the purpose, then this nature of rapport building, is it sufficient? If I'm familiar with my participant. If I'm not familiar with my participant, I don't know. I just found through purposive sampling, I found this person, and now I'm holding an interview with this person in a certain context. My initial rapport building started before I started with my research inquiry, research questions. I took a couple of minutes in building my rapport. What do I ask the participant? I ask the participant similar questions. I thank the participant for extending his or her help in being here for my project, for my research. How are you feeling? Is it okay? And these are the confidential issues, etc., etc. Is it enough for me to know and enable a kind of facilitation, enable a kind of receptiveness for the participant to open up? Therefore, the understanding of data, it has a very complex shade, it has a very complex body the moment we get into the rigor of qualitative research. Why? Because every step, every act, every thought, every sharing, explicit and implicit, it holds a cue, it holds a strand for us to understand how the data is gathered, how the data appears, and what the data is. Now, when we come to the questions, so first part was how to build a rapport. What could be a good question? Suppose I'm working on the issue of coping, and I come across, I'm working on how individuals, they cope with major life challenges, lifestyle issues, or any chronic illness. I'm working on that. And I happen to get participants during their course of suffering, when they are undergoing some kind of life challenge. Now, it is such a sensitive issue. What kind of rapport do I build with my participant so that he or she opens up with what he or she is experiencing and how he or she is coping with it? Because only this much is it enough for the participant to share his inner space, share his inner experience, or that what is close to him. Now, when this sharing begins, the first point of question was the rapport. The second point of question, when the sharing begins. When the sharing begins, as a researcher, I tune myself completely with full concentration on the saying of the participant, what the participant intends to tell me. So all my questions, all my probings from one to the other and then to next is to have a closer, as much as possible, gather what the participant is experiencing. And then we have all these dictums of a good researcher. So the researcher should be a good probe. He or she must be capable of being good with language, giving cues to help the participant believe that he or she is understanding, etc., etc. And every time we are made to believe that our understanding will bank on what the participant says in words. Therefore, most of us, when we get a very articulating speaker as a participant, we are very happy. We think that, wow, our research is going to be fantastic. Why? Because the speaker can articulate. And there is a lot of difficulty for us when there are pauses, when there are silences, when the speaker is not adept in a certain kind of linguistic finesse. We find it very difficult. Why? Because we have trained ourselves with language, with words, with phrases, with a way of understanding the things around us. And here comes a participant who's not at par. So how do we decode that silence? Okay, that's one question, very important question. Then, when the participant is silent, most of the time we see it as the participant's reluctance of not speaking, most of the time. And there is a part in us, in all of us, whether we know or we have an unknown relationship with the participant, we are constantly weighing that which we consider to be true. Sometimes we believe that the participant is lying. Sometimes we believe the participant is not revealing enough. Sometimes we are intrigued and we have this alarming thought back in mind. Why did the participant become silent when I spoke, when I asked this question? Why did the participant didn't speak further around this thought? And that holds our attention more strongly. And based on our interpretive approach, we make sense of whatever is being said. Once again, is saying and the said be understood without complementing the unsaid? Can the explicit be understood without including the implicit? Can I only rely on the words without understanding the silence? These three aspects, they are not mutually exclusive. They share an inclusive relationship. And not just in the participant, they share an inclusive relationship within the researcher as well. In our day-to-day experience, we find we are listening, but nothing gets into us because we are listening with the mind, we are listening with a frame, and we are listening with an assumption. Every conversation. Why? Because we are very, very busy in decoding. The daily interactions mostly are transactional in nature. They are functional in nature. We are moving from one task to another. Most of the time, our intelligence is consumed to discover what is to be done, how it is to be done, what is to be delivered. But this everyday transactionality, it undergoes a change when we enter into the research domain. Of course, it is conversation, it is language, it is sharing. But to understand this sharing, we have to go beyond the dichotomies. And when I say dichotomies and its beyondness, I mean the beyondness of said entering into the unsaid, the beyondness of seen entering into the unseen, the beyondness of heard and entering into the unheard, beyondness of explicit entering into the implicit. What I see, what I hear, what I know, what I understand is incomplete if I don't venture myself into what I have not seen, what I have not known, what I have not heard, and what I have not understood. And it is this training part which makes qualitative research quite an experience. It makes qualitative research both a challenge but also an experiential challenge. Why? Because it is in this nature of training, there is never any claim to say that, well, now what I know is all that is to be known, and therefore quite a relief that maybe there is more to be discovered, but here I give a closure. It brings a certain kind of humility in the scientific arrogance. And with all due respect to science, I call it scientific arrogance because every work, if it is seen as a piece of truth, and if truth is understood as a singular position, then it gets difficult to negotiate. It gets difficult to have a listening ear of others' discovery around truth. So qualitative training, it complements us in that manner because this is where I stand, but I know there is a lot yet to be discovered, and therefore I'm open to any new discovery, any new thought that comes into this arena. I'm open to that. I'm ready to know. So that makes the training challenging because the moment you think, I know what she said, I know how she said, I know what she wanted to communicate, unless you are with humility skeptical to your knowing, you are not touching upon the epistemological and the ontological aspect. So these words, when we read about ontology, the nature of reality, epistemology, how the reality is to be understood, no one helps us to understand what is this reality, whose reality are we understanding. Because like and unlike the participants' reality, there is also a reality of the researcher. Whether or not it is acknowledged, I am conducting myself with that reality. So instead of shying away from it, instead of becoming blinded towards it, instead of abandoning it, denying it, can there be a rigorous approach of acknowledging, addressing, looking into its mechanism? Because it is probably in the looking of it, I have and I could have a better understanding of that which is being understood, that which is being gathered, that which is being figured out as the central theme of my inquiry. So that makes one part very important. Now, when we come to this part beyond the dichotomies, how do we train ourselves? So we kind of helped in realizing that, well, just the saying is not enough, because if you ask me, how am I? And I say, I'm good. My saying I'm good is also because you want to see me to be good. If I tell you, no, I'm not good, do you have that much of time to understand why? And if my not being good is capable to make you say, well, I may not be good enough for this research inquiry, are you ready to know why am I not good? So, what we speak, and that brings us closer to a concept deeply borrowed from sociological perspective, a concept of consensual reality and consensuality overall. What I say and what you hear is around a consensual pact. And it happens at a very, very subliminal level, at a level where most of the time we are not even conscious. We are just, that is how, when the teacher comes and everyone stands up to wish the teacher, that is how I am to see you, and that is how you are to receive me. That is a part of our consensual learning. But nowhere in your experience does it mean that everyone who stands is actually intending to stand. There could be just an opposite experience altogether. Why the hell she's here? Why the hell have I why I've missed her class, etc. So what we see and what we hear, it has a lot to do how we see and how we hear. This is from the researcher's point of view. So how do I help myself in engaging with a capacity where I'm aware that what I'm listening is because this is the kind of understanding I have, this is the kind of experience I have in past, this is how these words mean to be. And there are several such notions, several such thoughts in human experience which are unparalleled in terms of having a common threshold. Perhaps in human experience, having a similar threshold or similar kind of experience is quite a challenge. It's quite something which cannot be assumed, because similarities, it brings its own biases, and dissimilarity also brings its own biases. So if I have not undergone the kind of experience you say, I have not undergone any kind of chronic illness, but I'm working in the area of chronic illness. And when I'm trying to understand your pain, how am I to be sure enough I know what you are undergoing? If I have not been without parents and I'm working on homelessness, I'm working on orphans, how am I to understand what is your experience? So, experiences are very different. On the other hand, suppose I have been through homelessness, I have been through abandonment, and I'm working in the area of abandonment. But whenever I find an experience different from mine, do I have that much of space to allocate to accommodate a thought different from mine? Or am I only seeing my reflection? Am I only trying to repeat myself, validate myself into how others are experiencing it? Am I able to understand them, or am I seeing my self extension? So this brings us very, very close to one core fundamental in qualitative research, which is around reflexivity. So if we are able to anchor ourselves, if we are able to train ourselves in this one aspect of reflexive approach, I think much of the qualitative understanding comes from there. Please remember the initial question which I asked: what is qualitative in qualitative research? Most of us, despite conducting qualitative research, we still want to present ourselves, our data, in a very, very positivistic paradigm. And every time when we are citing a thought, when we are citing an excerpt, when we are citing a finding, because we want to believe that it is not me who has extracted the understanding, it is what the participants said. We go back and say, नहीं नहीं नहीं, ये मैंने नहीं बोला. This is what the participants say. This is not what I am saying. Because we are not trained to take the ownership of how do I understand what is being said. Now we come on to the aspect of voices and silence. Voices and silence is one part which has myriad shades. It simply cannot be put in the class of शब्द और मौन. या तो आप बोलते हैं या तो आप चुप रहते हैं. कई बार हम बोलकर अपनी चुप्पी बताते हैं और कई बार हम चुप रहकर बोलते हैं. चुप रहना भी कई तरह के एहसास और अनुभूति के साथ आता है. There are various experiences of being silent. There can be a silence of protest. There can be a silence of reluctance. There can be a silence where, as a speaker, I'm undergoing difficulty in finding what is to be shared. Maybe I'm not confident enough. Maybe I do not have the right language, the right words to bring it forth. Maybe I'm unsure how it would be taken by others who are listening to it. There is a silence which also comes because I agree what is being asked, but as a structural protocol, owing to my position, I keep quiet and silent about it. Is the researcher trained enough to understand these many and much more shades of the said and the unsaid, of the voice and the silence? The focus of education, I'm bringing this thought here because it plays a very pivotal role in our understanding of research inquiry. The focus of very central core aspect of modern education has been to thrust, to speak, to articulate, and what you feel, you must have the skill of sharing it, of communicating it. So there has been a lot of emphasis on speaking per se, documentation, speaking. Unless you document, it is not taken as something relevant. It has to be documented. It has to be spoken. And words are taken with a lot of seriousness. But how do I understand that which is being said? We are totally silent about it, assuming that I understand what is being said. Now, this pedagogy of education has also trained the researcher in psychology to rely on the talk and to rely on the said. But he just fails to discover the part that an individual is embedded in a larger context. An individual is operating on several life scripts. There is no one life script. I'm operating on multiple life scripts in a given time and in a given context. Therefore, much of my saying is already predetermined the position I'm holding. If I enter a class and I'm not feeling good enough to teach, am I open? Am I given that space to say, well, today I don't wish to teach? How would my students see me? Will they see me as an irresponsible teacher? Will they see me as a teacher with mood? Will they see me as an eccentric teacher? Will they still respect me with this feature of mine? So what do? I go and I teach without feeling good enough. And if this keeps on happening repeatedly, probably the quality of my teaching may have some change. Or maybe by taking classes, I start feeling better. So I require classes and then I hang on to classes. So, in short, every experience, it, it tells something about us in the lived and the unlived manner, in the explicit and the implicit manner. As much as my explicit behavior tells you something about me, that which has not been explicit also holds an understanding to the same object of inquiry, to the same subject of research inquiry which you are trying to understand. But what could be a way of taking both into with hand on hand? What could be a way of taking them parallelly? What could be a way of trying to see their web, trying to see the kind of intricacy it builds around human communication? So that becomes one important aspect. The other part of data is most of the time, as researchers, we bank on the transcript and we take it as holy gospel. This is where the data is. Students, when they go to field, researchers, when they go to field, the first training, and most of us, we forget that initially. Why? Because we are so much enamored by the idea of conducting interviews and meeting people and trying to gather something out of them. We fail to make notes, which we say as reflexive notes, researchers' notes, around what was my experience when I entered the field. And it is not just a descriptive experience, it is also about with what questions I went there, what was my expectations, what was my way of trying to symmetrize, trying to create some kind of pattern which I must explore further, gathering those patterns. How was my mind doing it? Then, while taking the explicit interaction as data, as an interview, as whatever form I decide, what was my observation, not just of the participant, but me in the process of conducting the interview? Several times, this aspect is thought as too much of work. Why this is needed? But it is so much important because each and every thought of yours inevitably is guiding your questions and guiding the direction in which you lead your participant for further exploration. Your questions are basically lead for the participant to move in that direction. So unless we are relatively open, receptive to discover my area, my ground of my questions to emerge, how am I to understand the participant who was actually speaking in my leading direction? So that aspect of reflexive journaling becomes very important before entering the field, while entering the field, while conducting the explicit form of subject, participant, researcher interaction. And now when we come back from the field, how was the felt state? Again, something which many of us feel irrelevant. Why? Because अब तो डेटा ले लिया, डेटा तो ले लिया, इंटरव्यू तो ले लिया, अब क्या इसमें जानने की ज़रूरत है? बहुत जानने की ज़रूरत है, क्योंकि उस पूरे प्रोसेस में एज अ रिसर्चर, while listening to your participant, there have been shifts and changes in you, very similar to the ones who are listening to me right now. Before you registered, before you logged in for this webinar, and now when you are listening to me, there are shifts in your thoughts, if not very prominent and salient ones, but shifts, ways, understanding, questions, moods, etc. Am I able to document that? Now, these aspects, this part, which we say as the, like when we are doing mathematical solving, we used to have this rough work column opposite. So the neat column where equations are given, and the rough work column where we are doing the rough work. How did I arrive to this? In qualitative research, the rough work is much more important than what you are stating as neat work. And any researcher having delved in handling these nuances, any researcher who gets into delving with these nuances, trust me, reading his or her work always strikes a chord in you as a reader. Why? Because there is something more that particular piece of work, that particular piece of thought gives you than what you know about that experience already. Because unlike other dimensions and other fields of knowledge, psychology is about human behavior, and many of us, none of us, we behave only when we are researching. We are always in that transactional mode. So what is that insight which you bring from your research and which gives you that aha moment? ये वाली बात बता रही है, that probably this is how the process takes place. So reflexive journal at every step is one of the fundamental training in qualitative research. After that, when you transcribe your work, now that is another important part. You transcribe your work in a certain manner. Sometimes we get a feeling that, did I really listen to this? Sometimes we get this feeling that, was I aware when she or he was saying such a thought? Or I actually took it for granted that this thought was said. So one level of data, of course, is when you are there encountering your participant. But that is not everything. The second level of data comes when you are reworking, revisiting that which you encountered in a transcription form, in a transcribed form. And if you do it genuinely, you'll find so many words, so many phrases, so many expressions, so many pauses, which somewhere you had not observed, you were not alert about it, you were not aware about it during the course of interaction. But now when you listen, you have a different experience of it. So how do you take this into account? If the researcher is not trained in this manner, most of the time the transcripts are simply verbatims. So we get to see verbatims. जो बोला वो ही डाला, लेकिन tone, pitch, तुमने कैसे सुना था? How you state your written format of these said words, they play so much of role the way you understand them, what you highlight, what you keep listening. And it's quite a rigorous, exhaustive process because, of course, it has its own toll on our attention span, but ideally, we must go back to its listening on and off, because It helps us to retune the person who conducted the interview, that researcher, and if you are transcribing it after a long gap, definitely there has been a change in your own life position. There has been a change in your own orientation. There has been a change in your own mood. There has been a change in your own field state. And it is always not a pleasurable experience going back to what we have gathered. So, whenever we are doing the transcription, it is all the more important to, again, log into our reflexive journal and document whatever we are experiencing, whatever thoughts which we are trying to find very salient, thoughts which we felt we had not heard before, but it's there in the transcript, or we had not thought about it, all of it needs to be documented well in a reflexive journal while doing the transcript. Now comes the third level and another important level when you sit with your transcript. So if you see this shift, the researcher with an idea of what is to be conducted, with a certain kind of field state, with a certain kind of assumption, with a certain kind of awareness, certain kind of know-hows about that which is to be explored, entering into the field, gathering a data, coming back, the said data. After some time doing the transcript, so already a shift. Am I the same person before I entered the field? Or my experience of the field has changed me somewhere. Now, please remember, change is not always spiritual and transformational. That is one thing we have to be very, very clear about whenever we talk about change. And most of the time in qualitative research, we, without understanding the humanness of change, and of course, we have this anxiety of proving ourselves scientific and wanting to validate our rigor. We try bringing the transformational element into our words, but it need not be transformational at all. It is in the due course. It is something which is extremely human. When I entered my field, I had a certain kind of understanding. My understanding, is it still the same after encountering the research, the participant? Am I still holding to that understanding, or there has been some kind of shift? Now, any shift, any change, or even if there is no change, this too is an important element for understanding the data. I am undeterred with my assumptions despite having a 2-hour conversation or a 2-hour interview with my participant. I still believe what I believe. It says something about the researcher, and this aspect of the researcher holds a very important role in understanding that which the researcher gathers. So can you, if you see the link, that how inquiry, the nature of inquiry is integral to the researcher's position. The nature of inquiry is integral the way the researcher conducts himself. The nature of inquiry is integral what the researcher brings back to us. So no matter how much we say, this is what the subject said, this is what the subject wanted to communicate, every aspect is determined the way the researcher is understanding. So unless the researcher's frame, researcher's approach, researcher's perspective is expanded, unless it is spread a little more so that he or she is able to accommodate other thoughts, different thoughts, thoughts which are not congruent with each other, thoughts which are in conflict, thoughts which are unparalleled right now, but at some point of time they might find some kind of relationship, So, not always looking for linear relationships, but also having keenness and eye for discord, for multiplicity of relationships, something which appears to be non relational, but however, I found it interesting. Let me write about it. Let me see in the later stage, because data is actually emerging at every stage of your data processing. Every stage. We assume and we think, and that is quite a limited way of understanding qualitative research, that only when I am processing my data as data interpretation, that is when data is processed. No, your data is processed in every stage. It is already happening. By the time you come to your assumptions, by the time you come to your interpretation, there is a shift in the way you are looking at things. Have you been able to account that shift? That is so very important. Now, when you are doing the analysis, and here comes one of the researcher's dilemma, which I'm sure Annie in her later section would consider or probably would explain you further. And it's a serious, genuine dilemma. If at all you have moved from the initial objective, initial rational, initial assumption to something now, if you have made that shift, do you take the initial standard which you set in for your research, or do you consider these which you are arriving now? If they are not in accord with each other, if you don't see any relationship between them, if any of the objectives you find no relationship between them, how do you take them into account? Is it more scientific and more rigorous to retain that what you started with, the initial assumptions, because that was your research design, that was which was approved by the scientific committee, that was the promise with which you started, but now where you have arrived, is it just part of your subjective experience, or it has something to take on with the actual research inquiry? I'll continue with this in a while, and maybe now if I can take few questions if they are there. Yes, Dr. Prashanto, if there are questions?
Hello.
Hello. Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for this first half of your session. It was really thrilling, and I hope all the audience and students must have enjoyed. We have received a couple of questions. If you can reflect on it.
Yes,
The
that would be interesting.
Yes, ma'am. The first question which I bring in front of you has been raised by Miss Mandira Das. She is from Kolkata. Her question is, how far qualitative data can be generalized? And how far researchers' bias on mindset can affect while analyzing such data? And how can all these be kept at minimum? This is the first question which she has posed.
So one is on generalization, biases, and how it can be minimized in the research approach. Okay. What else?
The second question which she raises is the examples that is given here and in the books as well. All are analyzing the data after subject is already exposed to something. Can qualitative approach be useful in experiments?
Qualitative approach be useful in experiments. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yes. Any more questions?
Yeah, there are further questions. Another question is from Milind Maru from Ahmedabad, Gujarat. How can we decide the sample size in qualitative research? And what is the importance of a sample size in qualitative research? Another similar question has been asked by Ian La Peria Rilango. She has really appreciated your talk. Uh, his question is, how could we identify the validity and reliability of variables in qualitative research? Then, should I tell you the other question, ma'am?
Yes, I think that would help me.
Okay. Another question is from Shweta Mani Tripathi from Center of Distance Education, Aligarh Muslim University. So I think she is from Delhi. So how do we know that which population or sample can choose or can be chosen from any given qualitative research study? She also has
How
a
can we
question.
know? Come again. How can we know?
How we know that which population or sample one can choose for any given qualitative research study? A subsequent part to this question is, in qualitative research, if we use interview, then how do we analyze the interview session? Then the next question is from Aparna Nanda, CMR University, Bangalore. What should we avoid during rapport building? Hello?
What should we?
What should we avoid during rapport building? And another, if you allow me, another question. There are many questions which audience has been raising up. So I've been a little bit selective in that. So another question is from Rufus Deva, who is asking what sort of research study can be undertaken using grounded theory, with an example if possible, if you can elaborate it. Yeah. I think that will be all for now, if you can answer a couple of them.
Okay. Should I answer these questions now and then continue with my sharing of the talk? How does the committee wants me? Should I address these questions now to some extent?
We can also play the video right now, the GFSU video. Then you come up within 5 minutes.
We'll do that.
Okay.
We'll do that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Rehan, I would request Rehan to play the Gujarat Forensic Sciences University video. This is the video which showcases how this university has been
there is someone playing major role for the
contributing
establishment of
to the growth of
justice
forensic
and
science in the
peace.
country
That is
and the other relevant
science,
areas related to
forensic
forensic
science.
sciences.
The horizons of this science are expanding
So I would
to
request
embark
all
futuristic
the
innovation and
participants
development
and the
in crime
YouTube
investigation and
audience
detection.
to click
The
on a
government
link
of
which has
Gujarat
been
has
shared in the
established a
comment
unique
box.
university of specialized education with a focus to prepare ready-to-serve industry professionals in the field of forensic science. World's first and only Forensic Science University. That is Gujarat Forensic Sciences University.
Thank you, Rehan.
Popularly known as GFSU, was conceptualized and foundation stone laid by the visionary Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi. Gujarat Forensic Sciences University, established by the Government of Gujarat under the flagship of Home Department, is a highly specialized higher education institution across the world, which is the only establishment of its kind dedicated to forensic and investigative sciences. Located at Gandhinagar, the capital city of state of vibrant Gujarat, it has established 3 major academic institutes, namely Institute of Forensic Science, Institute of Behavioral Science, and Institute of Research and Development. Collectively, the university offers more than 46 postgraduate and doctorate level academic programs. Besides education and research, the university is also engaged in imparting training to officers of law enforcement agencies of various countries of the world, like Bangladesh, Nepal, Maldives, Myanmar, Rwanda, Mozambique, Ethiopia, and others.
There are 3 major requirements of a world-class institution. It should have world-class students, it should have world-class faculty, and it should have world-class infrastructure. This university picks up students who are the best. There are screening tests which are conducted, and limited seats have been kept by us. We have selected the best world-class faculties who are highly experienced, highly knowledgeable, well-qualified faculty who are able to provide excellent knowledge to the students. And then we have the best world-class infrastructure. And also there are latest technologies which are available with the university. We impart highest level of training to the police officers, vigilance officers, security officers, and we also provide a very high level of education to the students who come here from all over the world. Our goal is to see that we promote forensic science in the best possible manner and to see that the whole world remains crime free, and whatever crimes which are taking place are investigated in the best precise manner, and the perpetrator of crimes are identified immediately and they are booked with all sufficient concrete evidences.
The university runs in parallel association with the Directorate of Forensic Science, DFS, Gujarat State, to provide hands-on training. The GFSU's ultra-modern campus is spread across an area of 50,000 square meters, and new development is taking place at adjoining 74,000 square meters area. GFSU offers state-of-the-art infrastructure facilities like classrooms equipped with projectors, laboratories with latest equipment and instruments, rich library, administrative wing, computer lab, multiple R&D laboratories, and much more. The GFSU campus is Wi-Fi enabled, centrally air-conditioned, and equipped with highly intelligent security systems. This university has established Asia's first and only Cyber Defense Center for education, training, and research in the areas of combating cyber war and cyber security. This eco-friendly and green campus has international class hostels and guest house facilities to provide comfortable accommodation to students and guests. An amphitheater, huge playground for multiple sports, cafeteria, large auditorium with 560 seating capacity, learning resource center with internet facilities, together with a voluminous collection of electronic and printed books, journals, paper reviews, and articles add in to the list. Among three major academic institutes, the Institute of Forensic Sciences was established with an aim to provide center of academic excellence and ultra-modern practical training in the area of forensic and its subsidiary sciences. GFSU's ultra-modern ballistics research and testing range has got capabilities of analyzing bulletproof materials like jackets, glass plates, metallic plates, helmets, tires, and even armored vehicles. This facility is only of its kind in Asia. The Institute of Behavioral Science endeavors to impart education and research in clinical and forensic psychological sciences, and also to provide better caliber in diagnostics, psycho-legal consultations, and treatment and rehabilitation to clients. Institute of Research and Development is a dedicated center to the discovery, development, and application of forensic science in a wide range of academic and professional areas to create excellent quality of research work. Apart from its state-of-the-art research facilities at GFSU and DFS, the university has collaborated with many national and international organizations and laboratories spread across India, Israel, USA, France, Canada, UK, Poland, Australia, Malaysia, and many other countries. In collaboration with Canada-based Kinectrics Company, the world's first and only of its kind high-capacity conductor testing laboratory is being set up to cater to all issues related to the failure of conductors used in power plants. This laboratory shall have facilities for low-capacity conductor testing also. Not only India, but many neighboring countries will benefit from it in terms of providing uninterrupted power supply. GFSU also hosts students and police personnel from various parts of the world. The university provides 100% placement assistance and has created a full-fledged placement and career guidance cell which works rigorously throughout the year, arranging placements for its students in various organizations around the world. GFSU runs an international affairs cell to assist aspiring and existing international students, which may include overseas police and intelligence officials also. Knowledge, wisdom, fulfillment, education through investigation. Gujarat Forensic Sciences University.
Thank you, Mr. Rehan. Yes, now we need to welcome again back Dr. Ishita Bhardwaj. Ma'am, if you can answer those questions which were put in
Yes.
for you,
Yes.
couple of them.
Uh, um, the first question, which correct me, Dr. Saha, if I got them wrong, but the first question was around qualitative, generalized, and biases. That how is there the possibility of generalizing qualitative research,
Right. Uh,
and
and
how
how
could
far
the
the researcher's
biases?
bias and mindset can affect while analyzing the data, and how can these be kept at minimum?
Okay, okay. Now, the first thing is that when we talk about generalizability around human behavior, there are, in fact, these questions also hold the key to important contemporary debates on the approaches practiced in qualitative research. So, if we read different authors, we come across varied viewpoints that how generalizability itself is seen with little skepticism, because can any behavior be generalized? So, one school of thinking believes that, well, what we can infer, because it's all about inference through research, we are trying to understand inferences. So, what we are trying to gather and what we can gather probably is different sets and patterns of behavior around certain intent, around certain phenomena, around the objective of our inquiry. So, as many patterns as possible, it gives us a further insight into the human behavior. The same objective can be responded in multiple manners. So, to understand generalizability in qualitative research, it is all the more important to understand the nature of reality as seen from a qualitative lens, which is the multiplicity of realities, not just the reality, the truth, but there are multiple realities. Now, how these multiple realities are shaping my understanding, and it is shaping the understanding of the respondent. So, through my research endeavor, what I gather is about that part. Through my research, what I'm able to gather is this kind of pattern. So, in many ways, qualitative research brings us very close to acquiring, gathering several such patterns around the same behavior, and that brings certain amount of, I would hesitate to call predictability, but some amount of insight that why people behave in this manner. So there is this explanation part underlined in these patterns. Associated with this question is the idea of biases. So if you remember in my initial sharing, I kept saying that already the researcher is holding a certain worldview. Already the researcher is having some kind of understanding of the phenomena. It is rarely possible, almost impossible, to be blank slated when we are entering the field, because in our socialization, in our upbringing, in our exposure to literature, non literature, scientific world, non scientific world, our experiences, we have a sense making of things around us, of emotions around us, of people around us, of world around us. In that way, we are already biased. We have our opinion, we have a way of understanding. The other approach, and many such approaches in positivism, they have tried neutralizing this assumption by saying that, well, let's be standard, let's standardize that which is to be studied, and it will solve the problem. But with research, we have seen that it really has solved any problem, because we still don't know, and there were many questions left unanswered around such behaviors, around such phenomena, around such human interaction. So then we ventured into qualitative, where the biases are not taken as a liability, the biases are taken as an asset. Instead of shying away from biases, I take them into my stride and I train myself as a researcher in coming closer contact with my biases, trying to understand that as much as possible, because it is already playing its impact on what I'm studying. How am I studying? Where am I studying? Which direction am I taking my research? So, in qualitative research, biases are not seen as negative, with negative propensity. They do not hold negative property. In fact, biases already exist irrespective whether we become aware or we don't become aware. So instead of shying away and denying it, the moment we start acknowledging, it holds the merit and rigor of qualitative research. Close to this question, there was another question on reliability and validity. If you look into the texts, you'll see that the positivist qualitative researchers do talk about reliability, validity, and there have been the overarching lapse of the scientific paradigms, the scientific assumptions of generalizability, standardization, reliability, replicability, etc., being imposed and being taken as important concerns even in qualitative research. But there is another school of thinking which says that, well, the very rigor of looking into the making of qualitative inquiry, right from the beginning to the end, the inception of the question, how I conceive the question, how I conduct, how I translate that in human interaction, how I gather an insight, and how do I interpret that insight, if at every step, every stage, every aspect of my processing, I am reflexive about my approach, then I am bringing the rigor into work, and rigor itself determines the quality of the research, of qualitative research. In that way, uh, reliability and validity, as understood in a non qualitative research, perhaps there are methods, and in fact, even in qualitative, they do talk about method, but I, as a qualitative researcher, I do not adhere to that paradigm. I adhere to another paradigm which calls for deeper saturation, deeper absorption into the research inquiry with a reflexive stand and a stronger reflexive stand, because that helps me to understand and that helps the researcher to understand, why am I seeing what am I seeing? How am I seeing what am I seeing? And when am I seeing what am I seeing? So this clarity itself takes care of what is being seen has a certain property and it has a certain texture. And this texture is not just appearing from my own subjective limited aspect, but it is coming through an interactive, a dyadic process between me as a researcher and the researcher's world, the participant, the context, the culture, etc. And that what brings me where I am. So that takes care of the question on validity and reliability. Now, when we talk about sample in qualitative research, it gets determined by the questions you have in mind. It gets determined by what are you intending to explore. A thumb rule in a good qualitative research, what I believe, and I'm a very novice researcher, so take it with a pinch of salt, but also see how you stand with these understanding, is that how important for me is to complement the breadth and depth of my work. So if I'm studying, suppose I'm understanding the coping mechanism around chronic illness, and I take 200 participants or 150 participants and I conduct semi-structured interviews. Of course, I have a huge bulk of participants, but what have I known about them in terms of their coping mechanisms? Maybe some generic aspects, maybe some aspects which are there at a surface level, not that they are less important. They have their own importance. But in the next research, I wish to go deeper in exploring these generic aspects. In that case, maybe spreading myself to 200 or 150 students is not needed. I may have 35 participants. I may have maybe 20 participants, whatever is available and whatever can be gathered. But I have an intensive, exhaustive saturation, intensive, exhaustive exploration with them around the theme which I wish to engage with. Then the range, the depth, and the complexity of experience is tapped in a more richer manner than just spreading it too thin and having a larger breadth. Most of the time, and this is one thing which the listeners, the audience as researchers, they must be cautious and aware. It is not always a very good research if you have a bulk of participants, unless you have also tapped the depth of it. A good research has to complement between the bulk to some extent, but more to the depth, because unless you are able to touch upon any aspect to understand, then research falls flat. If this is what I have known, and this is how I have known, and this is what I had known is what my research is producing, then what is the point of doing the research? So the sample choice, it depends on several logistic factors, but it also depends what are you intending to explore? How are you intending to explore? Okay? So you must spread yourself. You must spread yourself around the intensity and the saturation of work rather than to numbers. That is one part. This is quite an interesting question, that what should be avoided during rapport building. Now this is very interesting. Why I say? Because what could be a good question? So if I ask, how are you, is it a good question? And if I keep silent and feel you, is it a good question? So a part of rapport building must come from your intuitive realization. That is the first thing. Do not go by codes of conduct. That is absolutely uncalled. Go by what your intuition says. A. And every question every interview will teach you further what could be a better way of working. Why? Because you are unique as a researcher. You come with a certain pattern which is extremely unique and exclusive to your being, which cannot be shared with any other researcher. Any other researcher in this world. You are very unique with that. So, unless you learn to discover that part, how will you learn what conducts you to come closer to your participant and what prevents you to withdraw from your participant? So, first, your intuitive realization has to be um, worked upon, it has to be given space and scope to be explored and expressed. The other part is inauthentic communication. Most of the time, we have this nodding gesture that I do understand, I know. But trust me, the moment we make this, most of the time we feel कि नहीं ये नहीं समझ पाएगा. हमेशा हमें ये जद्दोजहद होती है अपने हर एक्सपीरियंस के साथ, especially those experiences which are very close to our existence, our identity, and what gives us a sense of meaning. We do want to communicate. It's the very nature of human existence to communicate, but we also want to feel exclusive around that experience. We don't want to be like others, yet we want others to understand us. So, what you understand and what you don't understand, if you are aware about it and if you start becoming aware about it, that perhaps hold the cue for a better apple. Yes, there could be times when you don't understand, you feel locked, you feel stranded, you feel stuck. But again, you'll also find an insight of how to move ahead with it. Instead of the pretense of putting the fact that, well, because I'm a researcher, I must be comfortable. So, intuitive and reflexive and authentic approach is where you begin with, and have some sensibility and responsibility around the fact that, like you, the participant is equally conscious. The participant perhaps is more conscious because the participant knows now there is someone to listen to me and everything would be heard properly. So I cannot be missed out. But at the same time, the participant must also be given the feel, yes, you will be heard, but you will not be judged. You will not be evaluated. You will be heard. And there are parts which I may not hear as well. But yes, it's a very human approach. Personally, I always found that this kind of learning has helped us, students, me, when we were more human, because then we were more closer to our own awkwardness, our own discomforts, and that helped us to generate. The last question was about how do we do, for what research can we use grounded theory approach? Grounded theory approach is only and is a good approach to be used when we are interested in the process part of any experience, any phenomena, when you are wanting to understand the process part. So that is when grounded theory holds great importance. Grounded theory is extremely intriguing approach, but very exhaustive. And many times you will see that some parts of grounded theory have been adapted, have been taken into consideration while doing other methods as well. Reflexivity is one of them, reflexive journal memory, etc. Saturation of data. So they have been adopted by other methods as well. So these are the couple of questions which I thought, just closing to my lecture.
Yes, ma'am.
To my talk for now is around it. My intention for this 1.5 hours, despite you being told that in this webinar you will learn on fundamentals of qualitative research, but trust me, my intention was not to make you learn any of the fundamentals. Not to make you learn, because my idea was that fundamentals of qualitative research, they come with certain kind of sensibility. no matter how much textbooks we read. So, how qualitative research perhaps can be felt in texture, in skin, in form when it is conducted. That was the idea behind my talk. A. B. Most of the books will tell you about the scientific temperament and how from quantitative we digressed and we moved on to a qualitative. But what is important in understanding these fundamentals are some of the core concepts, and that calls for a paradigm shift in our understanding of that, what we have taken as salient gospels in understanding research endeavor: data, researcher, participant, context, and research inquiry. Also, language and communication in terms of words, in terms of explicit, in terms of visible, all these aspects, all these facets, they play a very important role, because when you venture into qualitative research, they undergo a change. So I hope that there was some sense making for last 1.5 hours, and perhaps this sharing would inspire you enough to go back and look into the books. What is qualitative research? I thoroughly enjoyed sharing my thoughts with you all, and I once again wish to thank the center, the university, Professor Tripathi, Prashanto, and the entire team for creating a forum like this where, to some extent, a meaningful interaction could take place. Thank you, and over to you, Prashanto.
Thank you, Dr. Ishita Bhardwaj. So, audience, we all are thrilled, and we have been really enlightened. And the way Dr. Ishita Bhardwaj has been presenting for the development of ideas around qualitative research methods, which is something which, as a researcher in the field of quantitative psychology, I was missing. She explained very beautifully the interplay between the subject and the inquiry, making sense of the data and the nature and the context. I hope the audience, especially our students and some PhD researchers, they must have learned or at least conceived the idea of qualitative research methods. We really appreciate your enlightening interaction, ma'am. I have a small token of our appreciation. Dr. Bhardwaj, please accept our online virtual greetings with our sincere thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Saha. And thank you
And
so
now,
much.
yes. Now, we had a couple of other questions, but due to paucity of time, and we have to start with our next session. So here we move on to our next speaker. Let me give a brief description about our next speaker, who is Mrs. Annie Bakshi, who is currently working as an assistant professor of psychology in Jesus and Mary College, affiliated to Delhi University. Her academic interests include gender studies, issues of marginality, mental health, and qualitative methods. Mrs. Annie Bakshi attempts to listen to silent aspects of human experiences, another important aspect of qualitative research domain. She has submitted her doctoral dissertation last year in 2019 and completed her master's from Delhi University in the year 2013. She has been an alumnus of Lady Shri Ram College. She has also contributed to ethnographic studies while working as a research associate at Center for Equity Studies in 2017. Mrs. Bakshi was also affiliated to Hindu College, University of Delhi, and Indian Institute of Counseling, New Delhi, as a counselor. Mrs. Bakshi is a dynamic and upcoming researcher in the field of qualitative research methods with significant publications in national and international journals. With this short description, now I would request Mrs. Annie Bakshi to continue the session with a talk on a topic: revisiting ethical principles, challenges and dilemmas in qualitative research. Over to you, Mrs. Annie Bakshi.
Thank you, Dr. Saha. A very good afternoon to everyone. And first of all, my deepest regards and gratitude to the organizing committee for inviting me to speak on this topic, and to my teacher who thought that I could accompany her in this webinar. Now, the way I look at it, Dr. Ishita has beautifully sketched the spirit of qualitative inquiry. And my task is to perhaps add to the flesh, the bones, and the wounds to this spirit of the qualitative researcher. Okay. And so my title of my talk today is Revisiting Ethical Principles. And the structure is that I will first briefly go through the key principles that are outlined by APA, the American Psychological Associations, and then using excerpts from my own PhD data, especially the reflexive journals, on how these principles get contested, they get challenged, they get confronted, and that does not actually make the research unethical, but perhaps more human, more real. And through this, I intend to touch upon several dilemmas that a PhD researcher more specifically will go through when engaging in in-depth inquiry with a limited number of participants for a long-term manner. Okay. Now, most of these excerpts are from my PhD thesis, and my PhD thesis was titled Revisiting Notions of Normalcy and Madness in Lives of Women. And the sample that I'm taking specifically for today's talk is my interaction with women in a mental health hospital who were given or who were diagnosed as patients, a term that I wish to explore during my research, and how I, as a psychologist, as a researcher, as a diagnosed normal woman, interacts with them, and what are the various issues that both of us face when trying to understand notions of normalcy and madness, which at one level are very taken for granted, and we understand that, especially when we look at the definitions of clinical psychology. But when we go deeper into what it is to live like a mental ill patient or a mental patient in a hospital, or what it is to live like a normal, educated, empowered researcher, and we see that these lines often get blurred. Okay? And through my excerpts, I hope that I'm able to tell you about how and when these lines have gotten blurred and my reactions on it. Now, just before we get into the details of what I will share, a word of caution for especially those researchers who are just launching into their PhD or their MA work is that do not take what I say as a standard format. These formats and these responses were developed over time. I was not always right, but I tried to have courage to accept that I could go wrong. So these came out of those experiences of mine where I faced certain situations which were challenging and a dilemmas that I confronted while doing the research. I'm going to use a PPT so that we can all read the excerpts together. Now, here are the 5 key ethical principles that the APA outlines, which is first is beneficence and non-maleficence, which means that the research should benefit the people on whom it is conducted and contribute to the larger scientific community and established literature. Harm to anyone should be best avoided and in some cases minimized as much as possible. Principle B, fidelity and responsibility. Psychologists should work to establish trust and retain a sense of professionalism about their work in their conduct, their relationship with their participants, and written work. So the aspect of trust is very important. Trust needs to be established, needs to be maintained and honored throughout the research. Principle C, integrity. Psychologists must not engage in any cheating or fraud or in intentional misrepresentation of facts. Now, deceptions, if used, should always be followed by debriefing. So that's the principle of integrity. Principle of justice spells out the necessity to treat participants and other stakeholders equally and fairly. While acknowledging the embedded power difference in research, the researcher must always be conscious of the boundaries of his or her competence. Principle E, which is respect for people's rights and dignity. This spells out the necessity to treat or to retain confidentiality and respect privacy of the participant. Be respectful of differences which are based on, and I'm quoting here directly from the APA document, based on age, gender, identity, race, ethnicity, culture, national religion, disability, sexual orientation, language, and socioeconomic status. So we need to be, as researchers, be respectful about these differences. Okay. Now, for across BA and MA students, these are the set of guidelines that you often study. And whenever I read them, I imagine a know-it-all researcher who's always conscious of his or her actions and others' reactions. An individual who begins and ends his or her research with utmost clarity and of concepts and findings. A person who's unlikely to bring any baggage to research, and if there is any personal history which could be titled as baggage, it should be treated as bias. He or she must establish trust and while being wary of attachments. There is absolutely no space for prejudice, and if noticed, it should be best eliminated and replaced with ideals of equality. So this is the image that I have of the researcher when I read these principles. And it's like almost the perfect personification of the modern liberal utopian ideal of the researcher. So the researcher is a person who has all of these faculties intact, all of these principles intact, is always conscious of them, and will keep exercising them when doing and concluding the research. Now I'm going to raise some very specific dilemmas which can take place in any research, but which become more salient and obvious in qualitative research owing to its nature. Okay. So I begin the slideshow again. Yes. The first one here being of the significant other. Now the other here, I'm speaking about the person who we initially called subject, and now we call participant. Now, the movement from subject to participant in the history of research in psychology, the iconic moment was in 1995, where the British Psychological Society said that, the word subject is very demeaning. It should be replaced either with the word informant or participant. Okay. So the subject being a person on whom I'm doing the research, while the participant being someone with whom I'm doing the research. But what I feel that despite the change in nomenclature and the labels, the participant continues to be a significant other. Okay. And here I've used an excerpt from my reflexive journal when I was collecting data in a mental health hospital and reading my excerpt. Though I was trying to deconstruct the term patients and was careful not to address them using their names only, I was conscious of my non-patient identity. Seeing my regular visits, I was once asked by the receptionist about what problem I had and which doctor I go to. I was quick to say, I am not a patient. Okay. So the moment, even when we use the word participant, and we are supposed to treat each other with equality and be conscious of our differences, there exists this fundamental difference between us. And here, between the patient and me, and though I'm trying to deconstruct the term patient, how quick I am to respond in a situation that I'm not one of them. Okay. And now this provides an entry point into how I actually see the word patient. How do I see my participants who are patients of this hospital? Now, sometimes the researcher is the other. Okay. With the patients and caregivers at the mental health hospital, I was viewed as an empowered, completely normal woman. The participants often began their sharing by stating explicit difference between their world and mine. This would include things that, I'm free to move outside, I can eat what I want, I can wear what I want, things that they cannot do. After the initial sessions, there was very little hesitation about sharing intimate details of their lives. I was considered a complete outsider, and that aided the safety of our interaction. Okay. So now this also adds to the complexity of wanting to come close to someone's experience while also retaining your own identity. Okay. Which means that what also Dr. Ishita shared in her talk, that I don't have to be a homeless person to experience homelessness. Okay. I can retain the fact that I have a home and I have always been homed while doing research on homelessness. And to mask or to hide these details sometimes actually work as hindrances in the research. So, as you can see, the fact that I am not one of them in that sense, I am this normal woman that they are speaking to, and I'm conscious of that fact, and so are they. It actually, in some ways, works in my advantage in terms of data, because they think that it is safe to interact with me as I am the outsider and not one of them. The third one, confined by confidentiality. Now, I teach undergraduate students, and often in experiments, we talk about how the name of the participant needs to be changed and other demographic details will be changed. But in my research, I encountered a peculiar situation when my participant asked me not to maintain confidentiality. And I'm reading the excerpt from the PhD work, which is that I tell her that your name will be changed. I will be giving you another name so that your identity is not revealed. The participant, this doesn't matter to me. Who knows me anyways? In fact, I would like you to use my real details. At least someone would know my story then. Okay. So, even though as a researcher we wish to retain confidentiality, there might be a situation that the participant thinks of the research and her sharing as a space of her identity assertion. Okay? That my story needs to go out by my name and by my details, and hence maybe I will be recognized. So, and this is, I think, an important thing to address, because when we ask the question of what is it for them in this research, or what is there for the participants in this research, and if they wish to assert their identity, should we let down the confidentiality clause? This is just a question. Next, building trust or establishing legitimacy. Now, one of the clauses that in the principles of APA mentioned that trust must be established. Now, between establishing trust, there's a thin line in establishing trust and giving validation to the other person's experiences. Okay, so I trust you, you trust me. I believe what we share is something that you have experienced, and we need not question ever whether it happened or whether it didn't happen. Okay. At the same time, there are situations in the research when the participant is sharing with the researcher, they are seeking for approval. Especially in moments of pain, they want the researcher to validate their experiences of pain so that they feel much more closer and authentic or validated for their own experience of pain. Okay. And I'm reading from the excerpt here. My silent nods, pauses, and utterances like hums played a significant role in directing the conversation with participants. I could feel that they felt safe sharing intimate and vulnerable details of their life. So there's a mistake here. They also often wanted validation of their experiences from me. This was tricky, as while wanting to be authentic, I did not want to legitimize their experiences of pain and suffering through agreement or approval. However, I didn't want to look distant, cold, or neutral either. In moments, I did feel that wrong happened to them. So, before we proceed further, okay, as you can see, with the kind of dilemmas I'm trying to share, These are dilemmas that have happened when initial rapport has been established. There is trust, perhaps somewhere in the middle of the research, where the researcher facade is also diluting. I'm getting more comfortable. I'm revealing much more. They're also more attuned to my moods. They're also more perceptive to my language. They understand what I say by when the means approval, and when the means go on. They're able to understand these differences. And it is here when the researcher and participant relationship gets very close that these dilemmas become very real and upfront, and the researcher can be in a place where they feel that, are we being unethical by doing this? Should I move back? Should I go forward? And in my own research, there were periods of pause, there were periods of withdrawal, there were moments when I didn't want to go back to them, there were moments when they didn't want to meet me, and all of this is also data. Perhaps, in my opinion, much more richer than what the verbatim of the transcript is, because it tells you something about the experience, as when you move from what is commonsensical, what is already known about me, to what I am also discovering while sharing this with you, it gets intense, it gets vulnerable, and our own coping mechanisms, our own defenses around it, of both the researcher and the participant, come to the fore. So now, what happens when data elicits pain? Okay. In situations when you are working with a situation of trauma, and there is an episode of violence that has taken place, and even though as a researcher I'm trained in counseling, I know that in this moment I'm wearing the researcher's hat and not the counselor's hat. And I also find myself unequipped to handle her pain. Now, what do I do in that situation when a question or a probing of mine has elicited trauma? She's in pain, she's in tears, she's telling something about an incident that has disturbed her immensely. My usual response to these situations was silence. Okay. Now, and I often wonder, is this passivity? Like, am I passive in my silence? Am I actually even engaging with her? Am I awkward? Okay. I know that she needs a shoulder to cry on, and she wants my words to echo her pain, but what will I do by decreasing her pain? Okay. Should I decrease her pain? And then you see that there are these coping mechanisms around her pain, which you can sometimes see a fault with, in terms of, you see that the person has gone back to their irrational patterns and they are reacting to the situation in the same sense. And as a researcher, you feel like wanting to caution them that do not do this because that will enhance your pain. But then the question comes, should I tell her? And then who am I to tell her to do this? And is she really asking me? Okay. Now, these questions are important to engage in because they prevent you from giving a premature closure to pain. They also caution the researcher from thinking of their own coping mechanisms as much more healthy and asking the participant to use her own coping mechanisms. And this is where, as Dr. Ishita said, reflexivity becomes an important theme. Okay? That while listening to the other, can I also listen to myself? And by listening to both these voices, can I allow the research to be guided by the silent listening as well? Okay. So there were moments in my research when I have gone with a set agenda. Mostly that comes because of paucity of time, that 2 months, I'm close to 2 months and I need to submit this work by this time. I have to get answers to these questions. Today I have these lists of questions and I'm going to launch into the interview with these questions. And you have that interview and your questions are very far from being answered. In fact, what comes up is something completely unanticipated. This is again, in my opinion, very typical of qualitative research. That is not to say that we should not go with any structure. Yes, structure is important, direction is important, but also what is important is to hold space and create space for the unanticipated, for the unexpected, but yet very crucial reality of that particular moment. Another important dilemma, which is what I call the researcher's guilt. And my own supervisor was very helpful in managing that with me, which is that in moments I felt that I'm exploiting the participant for my own research. Okay. And I'm reminding the listeners that I'm here working in a hospital where my participants are diagnosed with a mental illness, severe, moderate, depending on, there was a range of the diagnosis. And here I am asking them what it is to be normal, what it is to be ill, what it is to be abnormal, how do they define a healthy or an unhealthy woman. So I am actually asking them to go back in time, revisit their stories, how did their diagnosis happen. And when I'm asking them to go back, there were many moments I felt exploitative. I felt that, that is this, of course, the question of ethics to come up. Is this ethically right to do so? Another thought that would come to me was that, that my attachment or my relationship with the participant, is it based on my desire to get data from her? Okay, and I'm reading something from my own journal that I've been treated closely by her. And I know that she is fond of me. She has expressed this often. I do like her. But is this liking because I want to excruciate her life as data for my work? And her liking for me as one of the tools I use to aid disclosure from my side? Does the implicit latent objective in my knowing her runs through my mind as I wait for her in the waiting room? I am easy, feeling confident that she will tell me her life story. Perhaps, maybe just the way I want to listen to it. Listening to her story with distance seems no challenge to me. But again, is my silence an active employment to deceit myself from my own feelings of betrayal towards her and myself? Now, why this reflexive journal or this reflexive writing becomes a crucial thing to understand is because when I did the analysis, and in most qualitative traditions, including the most positivist amongst them being grounded theory, there is a column that we create in coding which is researchers' reflections. So in my PhD, the first column was about the verbatim, followed by researchers' reflections, then preliminary quotes about from what I derived from the verbatim, and the larger patterns that were observed, sociological patterns that were observed from the verbatim. Now, the crucial second section, which is a researcher's reflection, became an important thing to look at when you are analyzing your data. Okay, why do I see trauma in this excerpt? Why do I see illness in this excerpt? Why do I see a sense of helplessness in this excerpt? Okay. Because it is only through my lens that I can see the other, and therefore accounting for my lens becomes an important part of the qualitative research. The next thing that I want to speak about is the invisible implications of research. Okay, I've spent time on talking about why the reflexive journal is important and why speaking about your own feelings of the data is important. And then, when we document this, you analyze this, you come with codes, you come with patterns. And then there is this pressure of implications. And this is actually speaking to the question of generalization that was raised by one of the participants. How can one generalize one's findings? And this question is often answered in the implication sections of your thesis. What is your contribution to this topic? How do we take research from now on? And that is, by training, we often know what to write, but there are also these invisible implications that happen within the researcher and the participant. And for me, this was very obvious in the change that my language undertook. Okay, how careful I was to use certain labels, certain identity characteristics when understanding the other. Interestingly, the change in vocabulary was not limited to me. Okay, I could even see my family members, my friends notice the change in the vocabulary, and the change actually transferred to them as well. Now, this sort of implication or this sort of transference of knowledge that we see is rarely documented in the implication section of a research paper, which is why I have titled it The Invisible Implications. Okay, and as a research progressed, I noticed that my questions became crisp. There was a change in my verbal expressions. I began to state things tentatively, feeling uncomfortable to claim any social reality in an absolute manner. I also noticed that silence had become a huge part of my interaction with my participants. And that silence was not so much about I don't know what to say, but I need to hold space for what is being shared. And I don't need to take the pressure of responding, of concluding, of giving a closure to what seems scattered. Realizing that I don't hold answers to many questions, and at best this research maps my progress from preliminary ideas about normalcy and madness to more chiseled and nuanced understanding of women's experiences. Okay. So is this also a contribution where the questions that you begin with have actually become more refined, more specific towards the end? And I'm reminded of the philosopher Susan Langer, who said that, the answer to the question is not so much important, or the refinement in the technique and treatment of asking that question. If after research you have come up with better questions, in my opinion, that is a significant contribution which is made to the existing body of literature. Now, what the ethical principles also emphasize on is a lot about this dilemma of duty versus responsibility. Okay. And now, if you look at the definitions of duty, the duty is usually defined as moral or legal obligation. But responsibility stands for accountability. And I raise these questions to the audience who's listening to me, that, I might not have been dutiful, but have I been responsible? Okay. And I'm also asking myself this, that have I been responsible to my participants? Okay. They have, as you can see in moments of my research, that I am contesting and I am challenging the given ethical principles, but I am wanting to retain a sense of accountability, a sense of responsibility towards my data and towards my participants. And this sense of responsibility also has a trajectory where one moves from feeling responsible as an informed researcher to a person who knows intimate details and vulnerable moments about your participant, and also retain that responsibility when you're representing the accumulated or the gathered data to a larger audience. Okay. And I think in qualitative research, it is important to now sort of begin a debate versus duty, obligations, the standard format of doing the research, while allowing accountability, researchers' personal insights, and of course the participants sharing to guide the process of data. Now, in my own research, how this that actually came out was that I had a design in mind, a very strict linear design in mind. I knew what my catchment sites would be, the number of participants I would like to interview. But in the 6 years of doing my research, what eventually I realized what happened was that from every sample site, I snowballed into the other. Okay, which meant that when I went to one catchment area, the first one was being a beauty parlor in the life of mortals. I had some questions. I discovered some answers, which led me to more questions, and then to new catchment site around it, and then to a new catchment site. So the research itself also snowballs into and also creates its own format when engaging in qualitative inquiry. And it's not often, and in fact, I would suggest that it's important to think of the preliminary structure as a preliminary structure and not the final structure. But also, as young researchers, accompanying this thought is this feeling of loss. Okay, this feeling of both loss and being lost. Okay, and there will often exist these points where you feel that, okay, now what do I do? Okay, or I have this much data. How do I make sense of this? And it's important, in my opinion, to feel this sense of loss, because otherwise we are more likely to reiterate or repeat commonsensical knowledge of what we already know, and the most dangerous of all, what we want to know. So, and in this loss, the suggestion from my end would be that we take a pause. We take a pause from research, maybe perhaps do something completely different, and then come back. And it is not that we will really have a structure again, but perhaps through this movement, which we call, the let's be in my cave for some time, we might arrive at a clarity which we are not arriving at when we are bombarded with the verbatim. Okay, and this is again very specific or very peculiar or very typical of qualitative researchers that talk with trauma and pain. Okay? It is important for the researcher also to take care of him or herself. A feeling of fatigue, a feeling of exhaustion, a feeling of burnout is very natural. In fact, when I teach my students, I often tell them that when you're going for an interview, especially within the qualitative format, try and keep the other part of your day free. Because if you're going in the afternoon, keep your evening free. You might be exhausted. And it's important to account for those feelings that happen within you after that interview has taken place, or after that moment of data collection has taken place. Now, I have listed out a couple of challenges in qualitative research, both at the beginning, during, and concluding research. And these should not be looked at issues or problems to overcome or to be solved, but as opportunities to develop a shared understanding of what is not yet articulated and yet plays a very important role in the background. Okay, so, and it's difficult, in fact, to articulate this, and what I am again presenting in front of you seems like a very neat and clean format, and the messier part is, of course, hidden and unspoken about. But to not confront these challenges, to gloss over them, would also rob the researcher, the topic, and the participant of some opportunities of new understanding. specifically speaking of the researcher's role and responsibility towards the participants' sharing, especially in cases of confidentiality and trust, is that when we think of these challenges as opportunities, we also allow or we also facilitate the participant to come up with their own strategies to deal with their challenges. Okay. So it need not be designed for them. There is space enough in the research, if we're able to hold space for them to come up with their own solutions or their own copings around it, because of course they're often not solutions to many problems of human experience. An example here that I would like to share is again with from the mental health hospital, which is that the participant who asked me to reveal her identity and not to maintain the confidentiality clause, she said that, I am here for 10 years and nothing much has really changed in my life. And I don't believe nothing will change. Even though I'm talking to you, your research will come out and I hope people get to know this, but nothing will really change. And nothing ever changes. Okay. I think that is why I got into depression. Now, when she was asking this, that is why I got into depression was not that is a full stop. It was a question mark. She's asking me that since you are a psychologist, since you are also a counselor, is this the reason I've got into depression? Are these my thinking patterns that have led me to this state? Now, if there is a part of me who is trained in the diagnostic criteria and I would have an answer or inclination of an answer, there's a part of me who is also a researcher who is saying my job is not to give her the diagnosis. In fact, I'm actually doing the opposite. I'm trying to understand or deconstruct the words of patients and illness and depression. And then there is a woman also within me who's of a similar age who's saying, yes, I have felt the same. And you know what? I don't know what to do myself. So there are all these voices that are there within me in that moment. Now, what do I respond and how do I deal? For me is the secondary part. What is important is again to listen to these voices. What usually will happen in that moment, some part of you gets more salient than the other. The woman becomes much more important, the researcher takes a backseat, or the clinician becomes much more important. And there's also this interplay which needs to be documented when doing research, because these, which is again an example of multiple realities, that different sides of you come to fore in different spaces and you react to the participant differently, which is not necessarily inconsistency, but in my opinion, it is a manifestation and expression of authenticity that I too am wearing and unwearing and removing the researcher's cap and looking at you as another person, another woman, a fellow traveler who is engaging with similar questions. Now, just for some, I've written a whole, I'd like to share it, just a second. Yeah. I would like to move towards concluding my talk, and I've titled this concluding, one of the concluding slides, which is weaving a qualitative research. And I've chosen the word weaving strongly because weaving actually means using two or more threads to make a fabric or cloth, versus knitting, which is actually one thread. And weaving here, I mean the threads of the researcher, threads of the participant, threads of the context, even threads of the PhD restrictions, submission guidelines. All of them come together to make the qualitative research. Okay. So just some tips or some suggestions from my end for for researchers who would be launching into qualitative research was that we recognize that meanings change and we attempt to embrace instability and uncertainty. Okay? I think for me, this was a very important learning, because even though I attempted to deconstruct words of normalcy and madness, I will have to admit that I had a very clear definition of them in my mind. And in interview, I did find myself wanting the interview to go in the direction of my pre-established definition, not at the definition that I'm going to arrive at. Okay. But it is acknowledging this temptation and being cognizant of it that we, as researchers, must allow that meanings will change. Your research question, your research topic, and your pre-established notions will change. And this will come with moments of instability and uncertainty. And we need to view them as part and process, and perhaps crucial parts and processes of qualitative research. Next, having the uncomfortable luxury to change one's mind. Okay. Now, this is actually taken from a blog that I read by Maria Popova, who says that we must, when engaging in any sort of field work with other people, we should be able to change our mind. Okay, which includes accepting that, okay, maybe I asked the wrong question, or I don't have to do it this way. I might have to change my method of approaching this research. Okay. Now, in my own research, this happened towards the later part of my PhD, which is that I felt that I need to shift from interviews to more focus group methods. Because what was happening was that after some time, there was a rhetoric that was being established in the interview that I was not being able to overcome. So there was a rapport has been made. We've already have some understanding of each other. There is enough data to account for some concepts. And now we are falling into the trap of rhetoric. So I shifted and I changed my methodology to include focus groups so that I can raise some questions in the group of patients and see how they react to it. And how when participant 1 sees participant 2 changing her mind, how does she react to that change? How then these concepts can be further chiseled and changed in a group format. So there was a switch that I undertook from the individual to the group format. Allowing the research to chart its course, holding space for the unanticipated. I think I've already covered this. And lastly, and most importantly, which is being open to engage in dialogue within and between. Between here would mean between researcher and the participant, and within. And when I'm saying be open, I also recognize that it will not always be so. There will be moments when you are not wanting to listen to yourself. And being open to that is also engaging in a dialogue with your experience. Okay. So these are some of the tips or things that I wanted to share that I wanted to share for budding researchers who are launching into qualitative research. And I can be seen, right? Okay, yeah. Okay. So, and now before I conclude and I take some of the questions that are there for me, I've always found that, despite using qualitative books, and there are many, and we must read them, and we must strongly base our arguments in those foundational books, I think literature, for me, also answered a lot of questions, and poetry, specifically for some of the dilemmas that I was facing. And I would like to conclude my presentation with the poetry, which is by Vinod Kumar Shukla. And I think for those of you who don't understand Hindi, I would have the English translation here. And I would... हताशा में एक व्यक्ति बैठा हुआ था. हताशा में एक व्यक्ति बैठा हुआ था. वो मुझे नहीं जानता था, हताशा को जानता था. मैं उसके पास गया, मैंने हाथ बढ़ाया. उसने मेरा हाथ पकड़ा. वो मुझे नहीं जानता था, मेरे हाथ बढ़ाने को जानता था. हम साथ चले. हम दोनों एक दूसरे को नहीं जानते थे, साथ चलने को जानते थे. And I have come back to this poem many a times during my research. I still do. Because for me, this poem talks about that we might not know about the other person's experience. We might have a very limited vocabulary of our own to be able to understand that. But despite the differences, attempts can be made to touch upon a common chord. And this common chord could be in terms of certain human experiences of pain and suffering, say in my context, or even of joy. That each of us experience, yet express differently. And qualitative research, in my opinion, is trying to touch this common chord, trying to touch this walking together movement. Okay. And with this, I would like to conclude my topic. And so, yes, I've closed the screen sharing module. And I can take questions, Dr. Saha.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Annie Bakshi. It has been an interesting talk on the ethical challenges and dilemmas in qualitative methods in the field of psychology, as per se. We appreciate your efforts and a beautiful way of communicating to the August gathering, online gathering which we have. It has been a learning experience with you, ma'am. Now, let me take some quick questions. There are a couple, like Prathna Vaidya from Gujarat Forensic Sciences University, Gandhinagar. She is asking, what about situations where participant may be / is tempted to give a more exaggerated or fictionalized narrative in some parts of their responses, from victim complex or sympathy seeking? If you can throw light on it.
Okay. Can I take 2-3 questions together and then?
Yeah. Another question would be Smith Watts. The person is asking, sometime participant refused or given an incomplete data. That time, what the researcher should do?
All right.
Okay. Then, yeah, you can answer these 2 questions. There are other questions. I think the larger panel would be more, rightfully answering it. There are questions which we can take after that. Yes, Annie.
So, the first question being, what if the participant is providing an exaggerated and a fictionalized account of their experience, trying to play the victim or replaying the victim complex, and how does one deal with it? Okay. Right. I think there are many moments like this in research when we doubt or have a suspicion about the experience that is being shared, which is why we are using words like fictionalized and exaggerated. Okay. I think first, removing from the research context, if I talk about an everyday context, we know that in everyday conversations, we often present an exaggerated version of our experience. However, that need not be untrue. Okay, and that need not be discounted just because it's an exaggeration. Okay. I think my answer to this question would be that it's a very important expression to look into, the exaggeration and the fictionalized narrative, and we allow the participant to speak in this manner for some time or for a while. And you will, especially, and now in case when they are trying to play the victim, which is that everything bad happens to me and I'm clearly not responsible for it. However, everything others do back to me. I think there can be some questions and probes that can be asked that without doubting the exaggeration, probe the participant to just shift their position. Okay, now some of them could be, and some of them are actually not verbal. Okay, it also could be the nods that you give, or could be, okay, what more has happened, or something. Sometimes one has to be as direct as this, that okay, if someone else was to tell this, how would that person share this experience? And I'm going to share, because I'm also trained in counseling. I remember that a client of mine who would come to me, she was sharing her experience of violence in her marriage. And she said that, they bullied me for work and I was exhausted. My body was tired. They never heard me. And the victim position was constant in her experiences. In the second or third session, I asked her that, okay, you've told me so many incidents that have taken place. Can you re-narrate those experiences being your mother-in-law? Okay. Now, this cannot happen, say, in the first session or in initial moments of knowing each other. I have been able to ask this question only when I know there is trust, I know there is faith. She also feels the same. And she also feels that she can, in my presence, alter or revisit her opinions without feeling that she has contradicted anything or gone wrong. So that feeling of safety and security for the participant does, in my opinion, help them to re-anchor or revisit their narrative from another perspective. Okay. However, an important thing is to not to discount the version of data just because it's exaggerated or because it seems exaggerated for you. And now when I'm saying this, I'm also realizing it's important to look into why is it exaggeration for you. Okay, that's equally important to understand that why do I think that this expression of her is exaggerated and fictionalized. Okay. Now the second question, which is around giving incomplete data, okay, and I've added some words that, in moments when you know that the participant is hiding, or you already have more information and the person is not revealing, and you want it from the participant's mouth. So, it's data nevertheless, okay. And first of all, we need to answer what is incomplete data. Data at every point is incomplete. I think if I didn't have the pressure of my funding being exhausted and no possibility of extending my research, I would always feel my data is incomplete. So I think at every point, data has lacunas, has gaps. So data in that sense is never complete or is never confined. But when we note that the participant is intentionally not disclosing anything or is wishing to hide, I think first there is a requirement to respect this, to honor it that, okay, the person is hiding and I know that. To also look into why does it disturb you? Why does the hiding disturb you? And also, do we not also hide all the time? Do I not in moments choose or desire to only reveal some aspects of myself while hiding the others? So this interplay of revealing and hiding exists in every moment of doing that research. So it's important to look into why we call it hiding. Why is it the person not disclosing? And eventually, I do feel that these things are revealed, accounts are revisited, narratives go alteration with due course of time, which is why for most of us, when we do qualitative research, we don't often limit ourselves to the first interview. And my experience tells me the first interview actually is the interview that gets contradicted and revisited the most, because that's often the interview where we are just agreeing to enter into research. We actually haven't begun exploring. both the researcher and the participant. So this is my answer to those questions. I think we again need to look within. Why is it exaggerated and fictionalized and incomplete for us? Isn't always reality in some way like this? And if I give it time, can I allow my participants to revisit this exaggeration, to revisit the sense of hiding, and maybe reveal more or hide more? Actually, anything can happen. So this is my answer to the question.
Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Bakshi. We still have a couple of minutes left. There are certain questions which was asked to Dr. Ishita Bhardwaj. If she can be kind enough to answer a couple of them, maybe one or two I will pick it up, ma'am, for you. So one question from Dipali Bajaj is this: is there a set format for transcription, or we can add our thoughts along with the verbatim? Dr. Ishita.
Sure. Yes. Dipali, there, of course, if you look into discourse analysis or conversational analysis, there are formats in terms of voice intonation, pauses, reflections, etc. How do you create an account whatever is there, the silence, the pauses, the highs, the lows, everything. Besides that, when you are working on your transcript, when you are writing your transcript, you may have an active engagement with it and you may have thoughts around it. What do? You write those thoughts in your reflexive journal. You bring them that while coding it, while transcribing it, these were your thoughts. But when you are making a transcript, it has to be that which is there in the record. That does not mean what you have in your mind, what you have as your thought is not important. It is very important, but it must be treated separately. So when we are doing the data analysis, we are actually having two levels of data. One, the processing of the researcher, the other, what has been gathered as the recorded part from the participant. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Bhardwaj. Now we come to the end of today's series on fundamental aspects of qualitative research methods. Now I would humbly request our director, sir, Brigadier Dr. K.K. Tripathi, sir, to take over the online platform and greet the speakers. Thank you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Prashanto. Thanks. So we have heard a master and a disciple, and I'm sure you all would agree with me that both the presentations, they were full of wisdom, very informative and very lucid. Actually, I enjoyed both the presentations and the talks by both the invited speakers, and it was very kind of you, both of you, that you accepted our request and spared some time. I know you were quite busy these days, and you make it convenient to give these presentations. On behalf of Honorable Director General and Vice Chancellor of Gujarat Forensic Science University, Dr. Vyas, I would like to extend our sincere thanks to both of you, and we'll be looking forward, to an opportunity when we can invite you both here for, say, a longer period, and we can have a workshop here. It will be very kind if you accept our request towards that also. And with these words, I would like to thank you. I would like to thank both of you. So kind of you. Thank you, and good afternoon.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. We would like to extend our thanks to the entire technical team. Right? And
Yes, ma'am.
thank
Yes.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yes, we can now stop the live stream. Thank you.